Good morning, 6AMERS. The 6AMERS began in April 2020 in the heart of the pandemic. Forming this podcast is our way of extending the community and the message of the community into the world. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 6AMERS podcast. My name is Skye Michaels. I'm your host. I'm joined by the amazing Emily Bosser, my co-host, and we are in for a treat this morning. We are going to be interviewing John Pierre. He is the author of a book called The Pillars of Health. Emily, I know you were moved by this interview, as was I. What were some of the things that impacted you as you were listening to it?
Oh, wow. Yeah, Skye, there were so many moments of impact, but I would say one of the things that really, truly impacted me was when he talked about making sure that we're keeping our minds open to new ideas. It's so easy for us to get in a rut and not challenge our own beliefs. And what happens when we don't challenge our own beliefs is that life becomes sedentary. Our brains become sedentary. So he really challenges us all to open up our minds to those new ideas.
I love that. That's so good. So,
what about you, Skye?
This interview changed me, Emily. Honestly, I was always considered myself a healthy person, and I was a former athlete, and I always would work out, things along those lines, but I never really thought a lot about the food I ate. I was definitely one of those persons that I would go on a diet, go off a diet, on and off a diet. A lot of people, my friends will joke, I'm always either on or off a diet. And this interview really impacted me because it taught me the interconnectivity between our mind and our physical health and our emotional health. And the fact is, we can't just work on one. And that for me, I was only really working on my physical health. I love working out. I love going to the gym. I love doing classes and all this stuff. But the fact is, I wasn't working on my mind and I wasn't working on my emotions around food and physical activity. So the fact is, if you want to change your body, your health, and your well-being, you can't just focus in one area. You have to focus in all areas. And that was this interview it literally changed me. So that was my takeaway, and I really, really hope everyone takes something away from it. So,
if you are ready to take your health to the next level, this interview is going to be for you.
JP, welcome to the East Coast 6AMERS.
Good morning.
Good morning. JP, if you don't mind, could you give everyone a quick background of who you are and a little bit about what you do, what you're passionate about?
Sure. My name is John Pierre. Most people call me JP. I've been teaching nutrition and fitness for over 35 years. And really my background's, believe it or not, in geriatrics. So I created some of the first brain building programs in the United States about 25 years ago. So I was spending most of my days in retirement homes, senior centers, adult daycare centers, and I would see such deterioration. And I just thought, these people should be going to a university. They should be going to college. They shouldn't just be having Banjo Joe come in. So I started creating these courses where not only do we work them cognitively, but then we worked with them dietary wise, nutritional supplements. And then I took them through brain building boot camps where we did physical work. Actually, I did agility ladders. We used all sorts of different toys and tools to not only stimulate their neuroplasticity, but to get their body moving again. Because when you're using your body in unique and unusual ways, it also stimulates your brain. Yeah. So the background is really solid in geriatrics. And then, of course, I've trained, world-class athletes, professional athletes, a lot of people who have obesity, diabetes, heart disease, a lot of cognitive decline. And so, I've done all sorts of work in the last 35 years. Where I choose to focus the most, though, is mostly I work with people on their diet and fitness, but I really have a tendency to focus a lot on their emotional issues that go on. I work a lot with people who have PTSD, who have had trauma or micro trauma in their life. I've worked with abused women for 30 years. So I've done a lot of work. I've written a book. The Pillars of Health was my first one. And then the one for women is called Strong, Savvy, Safe, A Woman's Guide to Self-Defense and Safety. And that talks predominantly about being safe emotionally.
So many, there's so much you just dropped onto the table there to unpack. So let's start first with I guess for me personally, I'll just go personal. Health is something if anyone knows me, I've been on a diet for years, right? On and off, keto, carb, low carb, high carb, you name it, I've been doing it. If you could summarize for people, the simplicity of your message as far as like diet goes, right? Or health, right? What is it that you feel is missing from the American mindset around like diet and health that when we first interviewed, now we're reading this book as well. I don't know. Have you ever seen this book, JP? Like it's sort of the perfect combination, but like, can you simplify for everyone, like how to be healthy?
Sure.
Maybe that's the question.
One, we need to eat foods of our biological adaptation, foods our bodies are designed to eat, and not foods that we're not designed to eat. And currently, about 92% of our diet is a combination of animal products and processed foods. So that only leaves us about maybe 8% of our diet to be plant matter. And plant matter is what we're designed to eat, fruits and vegetables for sure, because they have the most antioxidants. They have they're water rich. They're just loaded with a lot of nutrients, particularly the phytochemicals, these plant components that protect us against disease. So that's like one of the most important things is if we could just eat foods that we're designed to eat, that would solve most of our problems. And so the most important thing you could do is eliminate processed foods as quick as you can. Reduce your animal products as much as you can. Remember, the animal products you're eating today are not the same animal products your parents and your grandparents ate. We're dealing with factory farming today, where 80% of our antibiotics today are going to livestock. And so every time you're eating these animal products, you're getting subtherapeutic doses of antibiotics. And that's one of the most important things to disrupt your microflora, your microbiome, these good bacteria. They wipe it out completely. And your microbiome is what controls all your health in your whole entire body. And once that gets out of whack, then everything gets out of whack. And the one food that feeds the microbiome the most is fiber. And fiber is only found in one food in the entire world, and that's plant matter. So if we could just do that from a dietary standpoint, that would be one of the easiest things we can do. And from a movement standpoint, you need to understand that our bodies are designed to move. As a matter of fact, if you had a blender and you put the healthiest foods in the blender, organic and blessed by whatever religion you are, and they were the healthiest things, and you pushed power on your blender and nothing happened, and you looked and you realized you didn't plug it in. Yeah. In other words, the movement is what turns on that blender, right? And makes a magical smoothie. It's the same thing with our body. Motion is what keeps us healthy. So you can't just rely on doing your half-hour exercise in the morning and then be sedentary the rest of the day. Your body needs constant up and down, rotating, extending backward, reaching. You need to constantly be moving. So from a movement standpoint, move as much as possible and do uncommon postures. So common posture is sitting, lying down, and standing. Uncommon posture is extending backwards because we're always forward flexing. So we need to counter it with extension. It's very important that you do some sort of squatting every day because you're going to get in and out of a chair the rest of your life. Well, if you don't use it, you lose it. And with all the work I've done in retirement homes, most seniors, as they get older, they just plop into a chair. They can't lower themselves anymore. So you want to do that. And ambulation, the ability to walk, is critical. So from a fitness standpoint, you want to move as much as you can in unique and unusual ways. From a cognitive aspect, that's a little bit more tricky because that revolves we have to have diet in there. You have to have movement, but you also have to have brain stimulation. If I give you the same crossword puzzle every day for a week, after 1 or 2 days, your brain is done being stimulated because it got used to it. Yeah. So you want to be exposing your brain to unique and unusual stimuli all the time. You should be using your opposite hand constantly. So you should change the remote control with it. You should open doors with it. You don't need to grab hot coffee or something with it, but use your non-dominant hand a lot because that stimulates the brain. The more that you stimulate your feet with massage and using what we call self-myofascial release, that's very stimulating to the brain because your feet are encased in a tube all day long called shoes. And so you don't get much stimulation there, and then your brain falls asleep. So from a cognitive standpoint, we have the recommendation is more plant foods for the brain to protect it because it's fatty. And so antioxidants protect it. You have our carotid and vertebral arteries that ensure that we get good blood supply. If that has an occlusion or it's closed up, you're not going to get good blood flow. So you get what's called cerebral vascular insufficiency, and basically not enough blood flow to the brain. So from a dietary standpoint, you have to be hydrated and keep that artery open. Every time you exercise, your heart gets stronger, so it pumps more blood to the brain. So that's key. And then stimulating your brain. And then the last component, I'd say, which to me is the most important component, is the component of compassion and love. That's where, as a society, we are lacking, even, believe it or not, worse than our diet, which is hard to believe because our diet's atrocious. But we need to get away from me, and become more of a society of we, where we want to help our fellow human beings and also help all expressions of life. And that's why I'm so adamant about teaching compassion and love is the most important component that I like to always share with people, because I've seen miracles take place. I've worked, as we mentioned last time, with a lot of people who were self-cutters and harmed themselves and have had some serious issues. And I was able to really help them turn their life around just because we started with more compassion and love in their life.
So I wrote down the 4 pillars, because this is sort of your book too, right? These 4 pillars are the book. And this is like, I mean, it's sort of amazing when you think of the simplicity of the 4 pillars, right? It's like, oh yeah. Duh. But why do you feel it's so hard for Americans, especially, to be healthy? Like what is it in our society that's created these blocks, of these 4 pillars?
Well, we have a warped sense of what health is. See, a lot of people some people think you're supposed to have energy all day long, be bouncing off the walls. So they drink a lot of coffee or caffeine, or they use medication. And that's not the case at all. If you look at nature and animals, they're not bouncing off the walls. Your body needs a combination of stimulation, but also rest to recovery. So that's one of the things. The other thing is we have a tendency to judge health on physical appearance. So you have to understand that a lot of times we're not supposed to be Barbie and Ken. That's just something that the industry made up. When you're a kid, you're given a G.I. Joe and a slingshot, and a girl is given, a Barbie doll or an easy bake oven. So our roles are identified when we're young, and we're supposed to look a certain way. There's a lot of people that I work with that are anorexic and extremely thin and have eating disorders. And quite honestly, many of these people, they're not quite extreme, but they look to society standards perfect. And there's somebody that might be a little bit heavier by society standards, isn't healthy. And those people are healthier than the person with the eating disorder. So we need to be careful with that. And then the third thing is that most everyone, and people don't like hearing this, but I say it with all the love in the world, is that we're addicts. And we're constantly requiring stimulation. And most people that I've ever worked with are addicted to food. And to be more specifically, nobody's running out at midnight to get some broccoli slaw. They're getting some sort of, chocolate cake or Slurpee or pizza, something that has addictive substances, which is usually oil, salt, and sugar. And these are mind-altering substances that create the release of dopamine, which is really a feel-good neurotransmitter. The problem is that you're getting it too often. You become an addict.
Yeah. I mean, to unpack that more, because that, when you think, especially this month, I'm super focused on health and eating plants and all this. And it's amazing when you start to take a step back, how prevalent salt, sugar, oil are in our diet. Do you know what I mean? And so how do you become a more conscious eater, I guess, is maybe the question, right? So for everyone on the call, it's like, oh, okay, I want to be healthier, but how do I do it? What is we'll go down the pillars. So let's stick on diet for the moment, right? So how do I become a more healthy, a more conscious eater, where I'm eating more plants, eliminating processed foods, et cetera?
Sure. Well, one of the first things, even prior to that, is to understand most people don't have any concept of what hunger is. Unless you fasted and gone without food, you really don't know what hunger is. What you are sensing is an emptiness. So I'm sad, I'm angry, I'm bored. And then what you don't like, that this is key, because this is when I really start working. And a good majority of my clients are therapists. And I work with them even on this, even though they have some training in. I say, you have to learn to be able to sit with these emotions and figure out specifically what they're trying to alert you to and what they're telling you and what they're showing you is in your life. And most people don't like these sensations, right? So what they do is they mask the sensation. So I've done a lot of work with psychics. They've been my clients. Now, psychics can feel energy that we can't feel, and they feel it so much, it's overwhelming. So most of the psychics I've worked with have been alcoholics, 400 pounds, drug users, right? Basically something to numb themselves from these sensations. They're no different than you or I. You're feeling something that you don't like, so you're using the easiest, most legal substance to get you away from that feeling, and that's processed foods. Mm. So if that's the first thing, is to acknowledge why we're eating these processed foods, okay? Number two, we need to train our system not to eat foods that are so hyper palatable. When you're using artificial sweeteners that are 200-300 times more powerful than sugar, they're going to make your body crave even more stimulation all the time. So we try to down-regulate you. And the easiest way to do that, and most people don't like hearing this, is eat more greens, because greens alkalize the acidity of sugar or acid. Right. If you remember from when you were in school, you remember that when you have an acid and you add an alkaline, that kind of neutralizes it. Right. And so that's important for us. We're getting all acid in our diet. Most animal products are acid, sugar's acid, and all the processed foods we're eating is acid. So when you eat greens, that helps to counter the acidity. So a lot of times what I do with clients is I'll have them get just a water bottle, and I have a specific green powder that I add them to add to it, shake it up, and then just slowly, they just start drinking it throughout the day, slowly. And that starts alkalizing their palate, and they're less prone to want to crave more sugar. So the more alkaline within reason we can get, we have to have this nice, pH balance. But for most Americans, it's just start adding more greens in your diet.
That's great. And what about, as far as like eliminating processed foods? Like, I think when we hear processed foods, I think I think candy bars, like stuff, but it's everywhere, really, when you start to think.
In other words, the best way to look at it is this way: what's not processed foods? What's not processed foods are things that grow from the earth. So fruits aren't processed, vegetables aren't processed, nuts and seeds, whole grains, legumes for sure, beans, peas, and lentils, and then tubers like potatoes, particularly sweet potatoes. Those aren't processed. Yeah. So when we look at the people like the blue zones, the people who live the longest in the world, and it's not just longevity they have something that we don't have, and that's disability-free living. So they're 80 and 90 and carrying buckets of water on their head. They're doing manual labor all day. They're squatting down completely. That's disability-free living. And that's really, really key. So eating the most of your foods, if you can, that are from the earth, that's the best way to look at it. And avoiding things like, it's better to have something like a whole grain bread than it is like white bread. But it'd be better than eating whole grain bread is to eat the whole grains. Yeah. Because when you mash them into flour, then that's changing what we call the glycemic index or the glycemic load, the amount of carbohydrate that gets in your system so quickly because you've already broken down that wheat already. Yeah. Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes so much sense.
Yeah, but there's nothing wrong with eating like a whole grain bread versus for sure white bread. That would be better because that starch is immediate into your system, where eating a whole grain is like putting a log on a fire. It burns time to release and you get those carbohydrates slowly throughout the day.
Yeah, that's awesome. How about, so for another thing for me is like, I don't know if this is an official term. I'm calling it almost like the protein myth. And I did watch the Forks Over Knives.
Oh,
and,
good.
Yeah, it's awesome. And to talk a little bit about like, I think in America, we have this myth that we need all this protein compared to like where, like what our bodies truly need. So like, give us more background on like our obsession with protein in this country.
Well, I guess one of the easiest ways to look at it is you look at it at a newborn infant. This is a little being that requires protein more than ever in their entire life because they're just starting to grow. And nature has said, we're going to give you the most perfect food in the world, which is human breast milk. And depending when when the milk comes out, when it's expressed, it's only about maybe 8% protein. And yet this is when an infant is growing the most in their entire life and needs more nutrients and more protein than ever. And yet nature is saying, well, we're only going to give you about 8% protein because that's all you need. So protein is really composed of amino acids, and amino acids are like letters in a word, right? You once your body ingests amino acids, and amino acids are in every single food in the earth, even fruits. And your body takes these little letters, these amino acids, and then it constructs different parts of your body. So generally, amino acids or protein are building blocks. So they make your hair, your muscles, your tissues, your immune system, things like that. And especially your neurotransmitters, which allow you to think. So we don't need lots of protein, but we do need protein, and it's in every single thing. Look at the biggest animals in nature, the biggest ones. Let's look at a water buffalo. Let's look at a giraffe even. Let's look at a silverback gorilla. Where are they getting their protein from? They're herbivores. So they're getting it because all the amino acids you need in the world come from the earth. So you don't need many grams of protein per day, but you do need some. And the time in your life you need it the most is when you're an infant, when you've been injured or hurt, if you've had a burn and your body's trying to repair, then we need to up your protein. But your body doesn't care if the amino acids come from chicken, fish, and veal and liver and all these foods that I don't recommend, or if it comes from potatoes and grains and beans, peas, and lentils. It doesn't care. It's like if you're selling me your car for $1,000, you don't care if I pay you in tens, 20s, or hundreds. It's still American currency. So your body doesn't care. But what your body does care is what is the package that those amino acids come from. And I'll give you an example. If I invited you out running and you and I went running, and when you were done, you were really tired and, starting to get dehydrated. I said, oh, come on in my house. And I took a cup and I dunked it in the toilet. And I said, here, have some water.
Yeah.
You would be like, what? And that's because it's contaminated water, right? You need water, but you don't need contaminated water. So it's the same thing with protein. You don't want the package to be contaminated. You want a clean source. And that's why plant matter is always going to be cleaner than animal sources.
Yeah, that's great. Awesome. And I love the simplicity of it too. And I think in some way, we just want to get rid of labels, right? We want to get almost like, we just got to be simple.
I'm just saying eat more plants. You don't have to give yourself a label and you can eat whatever you want. I'm just saying get more plants in your diet because remember, I wish we had time to go into, you could spend an entire week doing a conference just on fiber and the benefits of fiber. Yeah. And so remember, there's only one food on earth that has fiber, and that's plants. Yeah. Animal products have zero, and processed foods don't have any, or minuscule amounts. And fiber is basically, you have 3 million doctor visits on constipation alone. I think it's close to 800,000 ER visits just to constipation alone. And constipation is remedied real easy with two things, fiber and water.
It's crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, it's the craziest thing. I mean, I've had clients that used to come in my office in Chicago and didn't have a bowel movement for over a week. So they had this toxemia. Now they had horrific skin eruptions and problems because toxins are trying to come out. As soon as I changed their diet, they had normal bowel movements regularly every day. Yeah,
it's crazy. It's awesome. Let's go into movement. So we're going to try to work down these 4 pillars because I love, and I can't wait to end on compassion and love. But let's talk about movement. What are some easy ways that people can add, because I think everyone can understand, okay, I should go get my half-hour workout or, we go for my 3-mile run. Like that's easy. But what are little ways that when you're a realtor and you're working 12 hours showing houses and, on the computer, behind a desk at lots of stretches, what are easy ways we can integrate movement into our lives?
Yeah. So one of the things is that there's no perfect time to do movement. But when you wake up, it's critical because you begin lying dormant for some people 7-8 hours. So circulation, lymphatic flow, everything's been compromised. So as soon as you wake up in the morning, that's probably one of the most important times to get some movement in. And I think you had Mark Hernandez on, and Mark is amazing. And he'll do his rebounding and a little bit of workout in the morning. Then he gets to a gym. Then he sees me. So after he does it, so he gets a ton of movement in the morning, which is great. And then what you need to do, though, is once you get a little ritual of doing some movement in the morning, whether it's rebounding or walking or jumping jacks, or, if you go to johnpierre.com, on the bottom of the page there's a free newsletter. You sign up for it. And then I give you like a 20-minute video on movement. And I show you these movements to do like in the morning. Once you get that done with the day, then just try to sneak movements in throughout the day. So every time in your kitchen, you do 5 push-ups off the counter. Every time you're using the restroom, when you're done, just do 10 squats. And start looking at your body. Like now it's early, right? But let's say it gets to be around noon or 1 o'clock. Ask yourself, how many times did my hands go over my head? right?
Yeah.
How many times have you done a circle? This is a ball and saucer. It's very similar to like your hip, which is ball and socket, but your shoulders is ball and saucer type joint that's designed to go in all these different directions. And we don't move it enough that way. And then people wonder why, when they're getting on a plane and they put their 50 or 60 pound piece of luggage in the overhead compartment, they blow out the rotator cuff.
Yeah.
There's no flexibility. There's no strength for that area. Same thing. How many times in the course of a day do you actually squat down? And that's one of the first things you're going to lose when you get older, is the ability to squat and the ability to ambulate or walk. So you just want to replicate that and do it as much as possible. So try to sneak movement in, try to walk as much as you can. If it's safe, park your car a little bit further in the parking lot at the store that you're going and get that extra movement in. Just get used to sneaking movement in any way that you can. Will do more for you than almost anything, because we're one of the most sedentary people in the world. The Amish can get about 18,000 steps per day easy. And when I look at a lot of my executives who I work with, sometimes they get 3,000 steps in the course of a day because they're just sitting all day, which is horrible.
And I think too, it's like elevator or stairs versus elevator. Like
absolutely,
like every little chance you get that you can move, and you think about how many people you probably work with that have back issues.
Oh yeah.
Well, what do? We sit in a chair all day. No wonder.
And that really compromises things, because you're putting so much pressure on your back all day long, and we're not strengthening it, and we're not lengthening it. We're not doing any sort of flexibility stuff. And also, a lot of back problems have to do with underhydration. Remember, these discs that we have, they'll actually plump up when we hydrate them. And as you get dehydrated, they shrink down. And that's what's basically cushioning the vertebrae. So you want to for surely be hydrating and moving as often as you can. And I go into quite big detail in my first book, The Pillars of Health, about what I recommend. But you can get that free video. And I cover a lot of exercises that you can do daily.
It's awesome. All right. Well, and the third pillar is a brain. Is that how I describe what's
enhancing cognitive functioning.
Yeah. So how do we work on, because that's one that's for the first two, I think it's pretty easy to understand. I have very, very clear ideas of how to work on those. But like the third one, and I know you mentioned I didn't think of that, like using my opposite hand for things. And, I think about my phone, like I could type an essay with one hand on my right. If I had to even open it on my left, I think I'm challenged. Do you know what I mean? So it's funny to think of it that's a great one. But what other little things can people do to help their brain? And maybe it's blueberries or, feel free to.
One of the most important things though is what most people don't have, and that's having an open mind. And it's kind of like your mind is kind of like a parachute. It's not really working unless it's opened. And so you really want to have an open mind. I do lectures, I've done them for 35 years, law enforcement, military, doctors, lawyers, business execs. And one of the things I noticed a lot is when I start talking about things that many people don't like to hear, we get this really stern look. I'm not going to listen to what this says. And that's the biggest problem for things like dementia and, not really being all there cognitively, because you've already shut the door. In other words, you've been programmed to think a certain way or believe a certain way, and you're not willing to open up and start thinking about something different, right? It's kind of like if you're raised by the Ku Klux Klan, by the time you're 15, you 100% believe in that, and you don't believe there's any other way.
Yeah.
But suddenly when people start explaining to you things, you're like, oh my God, I didn't even know that was even possible. You have to have an open mind. You have to be willing to listen to people instead of putting up the blinders. And what I've learned in the geriatric field is the older people get, the more these blinders go on and the less they're willing to change, because change is uncomfortable. Only, wet babies like to get changed. That's about it. No one else likes to make change. And so you have to be willing to go out of your comfort zone and listen to people who are different. My background in what I do is very eclectic. So I'll go to seminars and get certified in all sorts of different training methods that I will never use. but I still want to learn that system. Now, from a dietary standpoint for enhancing cognitive function, the one food I've been talking about for at least 25 years before most of the major research came out, which has only been the last 10 years, has been using powerful things like fruits, like particularly blueberries, which have these high concentrations of what we call pterospilabine or anthocyanins, these components that are in the blueberries that can enhance neuronal functioning and repair damage in the brain. So brightly colored fruits, particularly berries, are one of the best things that we can consume to help protect our brain. I think we talked about last time that I use this product called Beet Boost, which is 4 beets per serving and 40 tart cherries. And the reason why beets are important, or arugula lettuce, is because they basically help your body form nitric oxide, which is a vasodilator that opens up the blood vessels, just like Viagra or nitroglycerin. It works on the same mechanisms. And by doing that, you're increasing all this blood flow to people who have atherosclerosis already. It's allowing more blood flow, hence more nutrients, and getting rid of waste products from the brain. So you want to do things that increase the circulation. And then hydration is also really critical too. You want to constantly be making sure you're getting enough water-rich foods. So fruits and vegetables, drinking some liquids that have that, but particularly liquids that have some minerals in it. And I talked about the green powders. You can take a glass of water, maybe add a little pomegranate juice in there or blueberry juice, a tablespoon or so, because when it's slightly sweetened, you'll drink more volume of it. And that's incredible for your brain, is that hydration. From a cognitive standpoint, what's really critical for you to do is you want to expose your brain to unique and unusual ideas and stimuli. So, like I said, using your opposite hand is critical. Starting to take different driving routes to and from work. Don't always take the same route. Look for different routes so you're exposed to different things. Do different things like crossword puzzles and word searches and games and things like that. That's important. And if you're going to do a word search, which is great for your eyes, to be training your eyes, because one of the biggest challenges we have is with vision care today, because we're always looking at a screen all day. We're never looking at distance, and we don't move our eyes enough in different directions. So word searches work really great. But when you do your word search, do it with your opposite hand. That's going to be really uncomfortable when you grab your pen. It's very awkward, and that's what you want. You want the feeling of awkwardness. Learning a different language, playing musical instruments is good. Engaging in conversation that's stimulating, not just talking about the latest gossip, but different sort of stimulation with people about different topics, and topics that are supposed to be taboo, like religion and politics. That's important to engage in, as long as it's a safe environment where there's not hostility, but you can just get different people's, thoughts. And of course, reading different types of books and news feeds. And if you always read a newspaper or the same online journal, you want to get something different. You want to, if you're into cooking, you don't always want to be looking at recipes. You want to look at maybe what's going on in the economy, even though you don't have an interest in it. It's stimulating to your brain.
Yeah, I love that. And I that's why I love a book. As a lot of people like Audible, and I'm not knocking Audible in any way, but at the end of the day, I think there's something about you picking up a book and reading the words. And I love, I'm going to try to now underline with my left hand, which is going to be challenging.
And one thing you said that's important though, is you don't like Audible as much. And that's an important thing, because some of us are visual, some are auditory, some are kinesthetic, but it's important to try to, if you're very visual, to listen to audibles, because it forces your brain really to pay attention instead of seeing it.
All right. Well, let's go to the final pillar, compassion and love, because I think this is one everyone on this call knows this is like one of my passions. And so how did you formulate this final pillar? Because I think this is one, I think the first 3 we all are like, oh yeah, of course. It makes sense. Like, yeah, eating greens. Yeah. Like, no, all right. Work our brain good. But then you get to compassion and love. And I think as a society, it's like, wait, what? How is that tied to health? How have you formulated? How has that pillar been formulated in your practice?
Sure. And I want to make it very clear that is by far the most important component of what I teach. Everything that I teach is based on that component of compassion and love. And there's it's a Sanskrit term called ahimsa, and it just means compassion and reverence for all beings. And it's being a person that's very conscientious and careful about everything from the actions they do, what they purchase, and the words they use. So I'm very, very conscientious about even the words I use. So I don't use the H word, HATE. I call it the H word, because when you have words, there's a physiological reaction that your body has when you have these words. I'll give you an example. Even when you go to a movie, you're looking at a celluloid screen, you're seeing a pretend image, but your brain doesn't know the difference between what's on the screen and what's real. And that's why when you're watching a scary movie, your heart rate starts increasing. Now, how is it possible for your heart rate to increase when you've been sitting in a chair dormant for 30 minutes, but now the boogeyman comes on? Right? Because your brain perceives that as a threat, and there's a physiological release of hormones like adrenaline that starts stimulating your body. Those are very dangerous hormones to be releasing 40, 50, 60, 70 times a day. And so every time you use words and you see images that are scary or dangerous, they evoke this physiological response in you. But it's also the opposite. When you see good images and you talk nicely, you start reducing your cortisol, reduce your your stimulating hormones. You're starting to reduce those things. And so we want to be in a state where we're not really stimulating all day long. The way I really came up with most of this is, as again, I said, I've worked with abused women for 30 years. I've worked with the homeless population and abused kids for a long time, worked in the women and children shelters and all that. And then, of course, my background in geriatrics. And I've had some clients, and I think we touched on this last time. I'll give you a quick example. And usually when I talk about it, it's hard for me to do without getting very sad or emotional. Is I had a client come to me at 58 years of age in my office in Chicago that had been adopted at the age of 3 from a satanic family. So if you could imagine what was done to this child, most of her entire childhood was done to her. And when she came into my office, she was 58, and she didn't tell me, but I noticed because it was cold in Chicago, she had a sweater on and she was like kind of lifting up her sweater and scratching herself. And I noticed all these puncture marks. And so we started talking about it. And she did reveal that she had been a self-cutter most of her life. And I said to her, why do you cut yourself? And she said, I want all those men out of me that hurt me. Because in her mind, by cutting and letting out the blood was letting out those bad people. And I said to her, well, if I have a glass of water and I put a drop of cyanide in, I said, I can't really take out the cyanide, but if I flush that glass with so much clean water, I'm going to dilute it and dilute it and dilute it and dilute it till there is no more bad. And I said, that's what we're going to do with you. I said, we're going to fill your life with so much light and love that evil cannot exist. And so to make a long story short, during our first session, she said, and this is important because this is showing you how love counters the most evil atrocities. During the first session, she said, I just want to let you know I can only afford one session with you. And I said, you could only afford this session? She said, yeah. And I said, well, your sessions are free for the rest of your life. That's not a problem. And I remember she looked and she paused. And she said, well, how about the healthy food you want me to get, these organic blueberries and this special stuff? I said, and she said, I can't afford it. I said, it's not a problem. I said, I can afford it. I will buy it for you. And the first word that came out of her mouth was, is this a trick? And I said, no. I said, this is what normal people do that are loving and kind. They help one another. And so I saw her one more time after this. Remember, she had cut for 30 plus years, been to psychiatrists, psychologists, psychiatric institutions. No one can get her to stop cutting. And after the second session, she stopped cutting. And what she said to me, to paraphrase it, she said, John, this was the first time in my life that I ever felt, she didn't use this word, but unconditional love. Because she said, you didn't want to touch me. You didn't want to hurt me. You didn't want my money. All you wanted to do was help me. And here's the thing, that anyone can do that. This was a person that had the most horrific abuse ever. As a matter of fact, her abuse was so bad, she walked into her psychiatrist's office with a cup of gasoline, poured it on her head and lit herself on fire. And she had not only the burns, but she had skin grafts all over her body. And so that's how bad her life was. And so all I'm saying is that what was the counter to this evil was love and compassion. Somebody that just cared. There was no Sigmund Freud here. There was no psychological test. There was no mystical, magical, anything. It was something that everyone here could do. And that's just being loving and kind to people. because that's what we all crave that everywhere. Now, many of us think we're trying to get love by buying things, but it's not really what we want. That's the buying the things. We're trying to change the way we feel by buying things. And so she finally felt what it was like to be loved unconditionally. And that's what stopped her from cutting. Yeah. And so that's what we just need to remember. Every single person that you meet, always try to make sure that you leave that interaction with them better than when they met you. And so always, whether you're doing something, even if you're just opening a door or saying hello to them, that is a nice positive seed you're planting, and you're sprinkling them with this pixie dust of love, which is really, really important. And when she changed, and I write about her in my first book, she started changing other people. She started wanting to help other people then, which was a miracle. Somebody had that type of abuse. She started wanting to help more kids and more people and be kind to people. She said, John, now I've been talking more to people who've had abuse, and I tell them what I'm doing. Yeah. And so I'd say that's the biggest secret, is working every single day to be this beacon of love and light with our words and with our actions. Because remember, every time that you purchase something, there's a karmic trail there. If you're purchasing your 99-cent t-shirts from Indonesia where there's child labor, well, there's a karmic trail behind that. You're not really supporting good things. I'd rather pay triple or double or whatever to support, fair trade.
Yeah, it's great. Well, and I think too, you think about JP, the power, like we have realtors and staff members on this call, and, in real estate, you're bombarded all day by negativity. And imagine if we could have every single person on this call could be that beacon of love and compassion. And imagine your clients like that are, when your clients are angry at you or whatever, and you just stay that beacon. They're angry at you, not because of you. Usually it's because of something going on in their life. But we take it as like, oh my God, that person's a a-hole. Right? I hate that person. Sorry for using the H word, but just to illustrate it, like, how do we check ourselves when we feel our ego or whatever it might be that rises, right? And it says, oh, I H that person, or that person is a fill in the blank. How do we check ourselves and say, whoa, let me dial this back? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's an important thing. And the easiest way to do that is to understand that you have no concept of the life that person lived. So that I've worked with some of the biggest celebrities on the planet. I've worked with some of the richest people on the planet. And you have a certain idea who these people are, or somebody that's, looks like a supermodel. And I've worked with some of the biggest supermodels on the planet. But when you meet them and you start talking to them and do the work that I do, you are knocked over by the amount of trauma and abuse that these people have had in their life from childhood. And so you have to understand that, of course, somebody's going to act a certain way and be rude and ignorant and have their defenses up because they've been damaged. They've been hurt, and so you have to realize that every time you have this interaction with this person that is kind of rude or not, in your mind, a good person, understand that you have no idea that person was abused as a child. Like this particular lady, I couldn't even tell you the abuse that she had. It's so horrific. So you could understand why she would say these things and act this way. So I used to say in the retirement homes, I would say to the seniors, when you go up to your room tonight, what would happen if you got in the elevator and a senior got in with you and was kind of snappy and short, kind of rude, and you then became snappy and short? And I said, what would you do if the next day you heard they passed away? And most everybody gets real sad. And they said, oh, and they'd be sad. I said, why would you be sad? Well, I didn't help them. The last words they heard were me being angry. And I said, yes, let's turn it around. Now what happened if you got in the elevator, somebody was rude or short, and you said, hey, it sounds like you're having a tough day. Do you want to talk about it? And the next day you found they passed away. How would you feel? They always say the same thing. I'd feel bad they passed away, but I tried to be good. I tried to give them some kindness. And that's how we just need to realize, is that we have to try to give kindness to everybody so we can be this beacon of light and love. And let me say this is not being selfish or bad. You need to do that to yourself. You need to give yourself that kindness and love. You need to be a lot kinder to yourself. And when you make a mistake, not beat yourself up. You might have been trained by parents, relatives, friends and family or society that when you make a mistake, you get yelled at. but that's not how it should be. When a little child's learning to walk and they fall down, you go, yay, and you pick them back up and you practice walking again. And that's the same thing we need to do with ourselves. When we make a mistake or we don't look the way we supposedly think we should, we need to be kind with ourselves, with our words and our actions, and not berate ourselves and be mean to ourselves. Your whole life should just be built around being this beacon of light and love where we're constantly, giving positive energy to other people, including ourselves. And one of the easiest ways to do this is to stay away from the media because it's always doom and gloom. Stop reading gossip stuff. Stop reading all this chats and Instagrams and all this thing about people and, living this fake life. It's not real, and when gossip starts, it's very vicious. It's like a fire. It spreads very fast. Instead, we should have more empathy and feel more sorrow for people instead of the H word.
But JP, how do we make sure, I think, conceptually, I think it's really easy for us to understand how to love others. Very, very difficult, ironically, to love ourselves. How do we make sure we wake up every day? I call it being healthy selfish, right? Loving ourselves. What are your techniques or tips for people to let go of all this bullshit that we deal with and love ourselves?
Well, one of the things that's important to realize is that you have, again, I work a lot with therapists and I work a lot in the field, which is trauma. The one thing, if you would help you the quickest to understand is, and people don't like hearing this and it sounds airy-fairy, but it's one of the most important things that I can do with a client, is to understand that your inner child was damaged often as a child. It was hurt. She or he was subjected to some comments that weren't kind and they beat that child down. And your job is to really show your inner child, show that sense, that part. There's a system called interfamily systems in psychology, where we talk about different parts or different selves, and understand that you have to be loving and kind to your inner child. So you need to be kind to baby Skye. You have to be kind to that child. And the way you be kind to a child is to make sure that you talk to that child in a nice manner that's kind and loving. You have actions for that inner child that are caring. I'm going to take a bubble bath today. I'm going to go for a walk today because that makes me healthier. I'm going to eat some more fruits and vegetables because that makes me healthier. So that's really important, is that you have that communication where you're talking to your inner child and you say, this is why I'm doing these things. And then anytime you make a mistake where you use the H word or you do something, you eat some food that you shouldn't be eating, you just remind yourself and you say, oops, I really shouldn't be eating that, but that's okay. I'll do better next time. I think now I'll have a little extra bite of fruit and vegetable. So you're always putting in good and you're just avoiding bad. Because remember, gang, when you dance with the devil, it's going to be very hard to get out of that grip of the devil, because the devil loves to turn you to the dark side and bring you down. And the more they bring you down, the more agent of evil you become, because then you're going to bring 10, 20, 30 people down. And those 10 or 30 people are going to bring more people down. But on the opposite side, if we bring people up and we support people, they're going to support one person or two, and that person's going to support one or two.
So good. So how can we help you? What is it, your passion projects? What are you trying to accomplish in the world?
Well, I have a nonprofit, so it's livingwithharmony.org, and we're on Instagram too. And, our organization does a lot of environmental work and rescue. And then also one of the things that we do is, we are part of a team that helps rescue kids in trafficking out of the country, Project Child Save. And then we do a lot of community work, here in Colorado. And what we're trying to do is work, always obviously fundraising, because we're trying to get a property where we can have a retreat center and we can do educational programs. So we're always looking for a property. We're hoping that somebody can, donate a property to us or sell it to us at a really good cost so we can afford it. And then I can continue my work, and our organization continue it there at the property. We're in Boulder, Colorado. And, it's not like we'd be opposed to moving somewhere else if somebody donated a property somewhere else in the country, but we just have a good network of people here and things like that. Yeah. The other thing is we just want people to just, people who can't afford to donate money, they don't have to donate money. What they can do is just support a group with saying, hey, I could like to volunteer. I'd like to help you look for foreclosures, or I would like to help you somehow. We need social media help. And let's say they can't do that. well, then just take some information that we have and promote it. Like I have a very important Zoom series on my site that's called the Pillars of Health Coaching. And I think you're familiar with it, Skye. Yep. And you could just promote some of the work that we do, because that money just goes to fund our sanctuary then. Most of the money that I make just goes back into my work because I live pretty simply. But the other thing then you could do is just become a better person, because if you become a beacon of light and love, then you just keep spreading that goodness around, and that uplifts people and it makes somebody's day and they do more good. So I think it's just about, my main message is just to be a better person, be kinder, be loving to all expressions of life. And if you want to help us directly, that's wonderful too. That's livingwithharmony.org.
Awesome. And JP, I'll put on your contact information in there. If you need it, you can reach out to me. And JP, I'm really grateful that you woke up early for us today. I know it's 4 a.m. is not an easy time to wake up for most people, but I know, and we don't know, maybe someone out there knows of someone that has a property, right? So hopefully this ripples that you created, it's hard to imagine the ripples you created today and where that's going to go, but you had massive impact, and just really grateful to know you, and hopefully we can help you at a high level as well. So
yeah, thank you. And a lot of the information's in my first book, The Pillars of Health, and I'd recommend just reading the last 2 chapters first. So because that's all on love and compassion.
I love that.
Everything in the book is like with Mark Hernandez, who's amazing. I call him King Kong Hernandez. He, just takes a lot of this information, and he just applies it to his life. Yeah. So you can do the same thing when you just read the book. Just start applying 1 sentence or 2 slowly and gently to your life. You don't have to be an extremist, but just start, can I improve my diet a little bit, my movement, my cognitive ability, and then my love and compassion, and just start small. But just whatever you do, you're trying to get momentum. So just anything you can do to build that momentum is important.
Awesome. JP, thank you so much, guys. Thank you for everyone that joined us today. I'm really, really, really grateful for everyone who has hopped on today. So hopefully you feel inspired and you feel a lot of love and compassion, and much love to everyone on this call. All right, guys, let's go spread the light.
Hey, thank you, everybody. Good to see everyone.
JP. We'll be in touch for sure, man.
Thanks for listening to the 6AMERS podcast. If you liked what you heard on this episode, we would love to hear from you. So leave a comment and review, and don't forget to subscribe. For more information on our 6AMERS community, guests, book recommendations, and more, visit our website at the6amers.com, the6amers.com. We also invite you to follow us on Instagram for a daily dose of inspiration, motivation, and fun. See you next time.